I cooked a brisket using Aaron Franklin's crazy new Kamado Brisket Recipe. This is an insane technique that I never thought would work on a Kamado Joe or any Kamado smoker, and I almost screwed it up with a few mistakes, but I figured it out and the brisket came out looking and tasting identical to a Texas-style offset smoker brisket. So stay tuned because this recipe is going to help you make the best brisket of your life on a Kamado smoker, so let's get smoking. I'm Steve Gao, and in addition to being the host of Smoke Trails Barbecue, I also moonlight as Aaron Franklin's #1 most obsessive fan slash crazy conspiracy theorist. So when he came out with his new book, Franklin's Smoke, I was super excited to dive into it and uncover all of Aaron's barbecue secrets. But in addition to other brisket secrets, I was surprised to find hidden in this barbecue tome of arcane knowledge an unusual recipe for cooking a brisket on a Kamado smoker. Now, Aaron's an offset smoker guy, so when I saw this Kamado recipe in his book, I was like, what is he doing messing around with this outdoor easy bake oven? That's what grumpy offset smoker people say about Kamado smokers. I don't actually think that. All smokers are created equal. And more equal than I thought after using this recipe. Now, Aaron uses an XL big green egg in his recipe, but the technique works on any Kamado style smoker. I'm using my Kamado Joe Classic 1 in this video, and it worked great. Basically what Aaron did is he cut a crescent shape in the big green egg's heat deflector so he can add wood chunks throughout the cook, just like an offset smoker. Then there's a water pan on top of it to add humidity and absorb radiant heat from below, and a rack on top of that for the brisket to go on. He adds wood splits and or charcoal every 30 minutes, so he has a clean burning fire with indirect heat going up and over top of the brisket, again just like an offset smoker. And there's one additional really important mod that he does to make things run even more like an offset smoker, which I'll get to after thanking the sponsor of this video, ZBiotics. Let's face it, after a night with drinks, I don't bounce back the next day like I used to. I have to make a choice. Either I have a great night or I have a great next day. That is, until I found ZBiotics. ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic produces an enzyme to break that byproduct down. It's designed to work like your liver, but in your gut where you need it the most. Just remember to drink ZBiotics before drinking alcohol, drink responsibly, and get a good night's sleep to feel your best tomorrow. Personally, when I take ZBiotics, I just feel more normal the next day. I'm able to get up early with my son and take him to daycare and do all the things that I need to do as a dad without feeling ugh. So this holiday season, give yourself, your family, and your friends the gift of a better tomorrow with ZBiotics. Go to zbiotics.com/SmokeTrailsBBQ or scan the QR code on your screen right now to get 15% off your first order when you use code SmokeTrailsBBQ at checkout. You can also sign up for a subscription using my code so you can stay prepared no matter the time or occasion. ZBiotics is also backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/SmokeTrailsBBQ and use code SmokeTrailsBBQ at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, ZBiotics, for sponsoring this video. Okay, now for the super hack that Aaron Franklin uses to get massive airflow on his Kamado smoker. What he does is he adds a 4-foot length of HVAC pipe to make a smokestack on top of the Kamado, which really increases the stack effect and the air draw, so you get tons of convective airflow. Now, I don't have a big green egg, just this little Kamado Joe Classic, so I removed 1/2 of the heat deflector and I placed a water pan over top of it. Then I placed 1/2 of the grate over top of it for the brisket to sit on. And finally, I put the other half of the deflector plate down into the fire basket to help deflect the heat up and over the brisket. By the way, this is a similar setup to what James from Smokin' Dad Barbecue did in a video 2 years ago. In that video, he set up 2 baffle plates, one over top of the other, underneath the brisket in his Big Joe, and ran a small fire underneath it that he constantly fed with small wood chunks. I'd recommend checking out that video as well if you plan on doing this, because James has some great tips. Sorry, James, I would have put your face in the thumbnail and made this video about your technique, but you know, Aaron Franklin, gotta get those clicks. You understand. Now I'm filling the bottom of my Kamado Joe smoker with some charcoal briquettes. This is probably too many, to be honest. You probably only need half of what you see me adding here, but it was a cold and snowy day over here in Canada, so I needed some extra fuel to get things warmed up. And then I'm simply lighting them up with a charcoal lighter. Once the coals are lit, I'm kicking the deflector plate in so it's on a 45-degree angle. Now it's really going to deflect that heat up and over top of the brisket and prevent the bottom from getting too burnt. Kind of like how you would set up a Weber kettle for 2-zone indirect cooking. And now we're just going to let that burn down into a nice coal bed. Now moving on to trimming the brisket. This is really important because it needs to fit on your Kamado, and mine is only a tiny Kamado Joe Classic, so I'm starting by slicing off the tip of the flat to remove it from the cryovac bag. Then I'm slicing off the edge of the hump side of the brisket. Then I'm removing the hump, and then I'm slicing off the edge of the other side of the brisket, and now I'm carving down the fat cap to a 1/4 inch thickness. Flipping the brisket over, I'm removing all of the silver skin, then I carve down the thick side of the seam fat. And now for the really critical part. I'm placing it on the actual grate it's going to cook on. You can see how it's way too big, so I'm marking it with my finger where I need to slice it down. And finally, I'm placing it back on the cutting board and slicing down the flat so it'll fit on the smoker. You could save that piece for sausage, or what I like to do is I make brisket bourguignon or brisket bulgogi. There's many uses for it. Now I'm flipping it over, and here's where we start departing from Franklin's exact method. If you want to follow Aaron's method exactly, just season your brisket with equal parts salt and pepper, but I like to spice things up, so I'm slathering it with Golden Mountain seasoning sauce. You can also just use soy sauce though. And finally, I'm rubbing it with Smoke Trails Barbecue Brisket Rub. This rub is designed to go on super heavy so you get maximum bark and texture, and it also has sumac in it, which really darkens up the brisket very quickly. I'll put a link to that in the description section below so you guys can purchase it on Amazon, and I'd really appreciate it. Thank you for supporting the channel. Now, after an hour, I'm adding some hot water to the water pan and placing the brisket on the Kamado Joe. Briskets have a naturally rounded side, so I'm matching that with the curvature of the Kamado for at least the first part of the cook until it starts to shrink up so we can rotate it. And now I'm starting to add some hardwood splits, and this is where I made my first mistake because these splits are a bit too big. You should use smaller chunks and add them every 30 minutes or so, as Aaron Franklin recommends in his recipe. Aaron also recommends post oak, but I use yellow birch because that's what's available in my area. Finally, I'm adding a meter wireless probe to the hot side of the brisket and another on the back side so I can always be monitoring the temperature on the hot side of the brisket even when I start turning the brisket around throughout the cook. But you can also just place an ambient probe on the hot side of the grill grate if that's all you have. Now, after closing the lid, I'm removing the existing exhaust from the Kamado Joe and I'm placing an HVAC pipe over top of it. Now, this was my second mistake. I only had a 5-inch diameter HVAC pipe and it didn't quite fit over top of the exhaust. A 6-inch diameter pipe actually would have worked much better because then it would have slipped right over the exhaust and I could have used a hose clamp to really secure it tight. Luckily, my dad taught me one simple life lesson to solve all of life's problems. When in doubt, duct tape it. Well, in this case, it's HVAC tape, but pretty close, and this is a duct after all, and this is tape. So after it was all taped up, it worked really well and created a ton of draw and airflow. I also added this little damper at the top, but it's really not necessary because for the most part, you should have it open the whole cook anyway. And there we have it, an unholy marriage of offset smoker and Kamado, one of Barbecue Jesus's own prototypes. And to quote the late great Hunter S. Thompson, too weird to live, too rare to die. But I'll be darned if it doesn't make one killer brisket. Now, in Aaron's recipe, he recommends 260 degrees for the first 3 hours and then bumping up temperatures to 275 for the next 3 hours after that. Then he tells us to bump the temperatures up to 285 until the brisket reaches an internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit, at which point he wants us to wrap it in butcher paper. And then finally, he tells us to increase the temperatures to 300 degrees Fahrenheit until the brisket probes at around 205 to 208 degrees Fahrenheit, and then rest it down a few hours until it comes down to 140 degrees internal. Now, you could do it exactly that way, and I'm going to put the details of that recipe in the description section below, but it's important to understand that the core of Aaron's recipe is how the grill is set up and how the fire is managed throughout the entire cook. It's not necessarily the brisket technique, of which there are many that you could use. The real essential element of Aaron's technique is getting nice airflow over top of the brisket so you can get that offset quality bark with the fully rendered fat cap. So at this point, I deviated from Aaron Franklin's method and I used my method. But again, if you want to follow Aaron's method exactly, I will put that in the description section below. Now, every 30 minutes to an hour, I'm taking the stack off, I'm opening the lid, I'm spritzing the edges of the brisket using equal parts water, Golden Mountain seasoning sauce, and apple cider vinegar, and then I'm rotating the brisket around to help it cook more evenly. I do not recommend flipping it upside down because it's going to mess up the fat cap. Then I'm adding a few charcoal briquettes and a few chunks of wood, and this is where I made my third mistake. I thought that because this was a Kamado smoker, it would be way easier to maintain temperatures. I couldn't have been more wrong. It's just as hard as an offset smoker with this technique, and you really have to be paying attention and making little tiny adjustments every 15 to 20 minutes to avoid temperature spikes. You can see how abysmal my fire management is on this meter graph. I was just too busy that day to really put in the time to get it steady, but here's a few tips so you can do better than I did. First of all, add less fuel and do it more frequently so you get more even temperatures. Second, if the temperature spikes too much, you can close down the air intake to drop it down and then open it back up slowly over time as your fuel burns down and the temperature decreases. And finally, don't get too carried away about maintaining exact temperatures. I actually had temperature spikes of up to 600 degrees during this cook, and it still turned out absolutely amazing. So don't worry about it too much. Just try to keep the temperature within the zone of 225 to 275 within the first 3 to 4 hours of the cook, and then the last part of the cook, try to keep it within 250, 300, even 325 is fine, and just do your best to dial those temperatures in. Now, after 12 hours, the brisket looks like this, super dark bark with a nicely rendered squishy fat cap, and when I probe it, it's right around 190 to 195 everywhere I probe. So now I'm placing the brisket down on some foil with clarified butter and beef tallow, and I'm also adding a bit more Golden Mountain seasoning sauce. Again, you can substitute soy sauce for it. This is just a bit more sweet and malty and has more of an umami flavor. Now, some of that flavor is gonna get on the brisket now, but that's not really why we're adding it. We're adding it so that we can slather each of the slices with it when it's on the cutting board. That's where all of this fat and flavor we're adding to the wrap is really gonna show up at the end of the day. And after it's tightly wrapped up, it's going in my holding oven at 150 degrees for the next 18 hours. You can bag it and sous vide it. You can use your toaster oven or any number of other things to hold your brisket. I'm confident you can figure it out, and trust me when I say it is worth the extra effort. All right, fast forward 18 hours later, this brisket is now done. It's been held at 150 for the past 18 hours, and it's ready to be sliced. But first, and this is my favorite part of the show, guys, for obvious reasons, I get to taste the brisket, but I also like to taste a new scotch. I haven't tried this one before. It is an Islay scotch, and it is called Scarabus. I believe it's from an indie bottler, an independent bottler called Hunter Lang. So interested to see how this pairs with brisket. I'm gonna pour myself a little dram. Ooh, that's peaty. Very peaty, very salty, hints of vanilla. I think it's gonna go great with this brisket. I'm gonna slice into this brisket with my new Dalstrong Valhalla series slicing knife. This thing is crazy, it looks like a sword or something like that. So really excited to see how it performs. But first, I'm just gonna inspect the exterior of the brisket. We'll see how crispy the edges are. It is getting a little bit crispy towards the flat here. As I feel underneath the edges of the flat, it does feel quite hard, so that might have got burnt up a little bit. We'll see how the very edges of the flat held up. This might not even be edible, I don't even know. Underneath the brisket, it feels a little bit tough, so might have got a little bit too much heat under the brisket, but up top, I think the fat is gonna be really well rendered, and the point is actually really squishy. It's not too crunchy at all. So let's just slice into this guy and see what it looks like from the inside. Ooh, this thing is slicing like a dream. I'll give you guys a look before I put any tallow on it. Again, this is a choice grade brisket, and as you guys saw at the beginning of this video, it's lower choice. It doesn't have a lot of marbling, and it still looks insanely juicy. That is a really juicy brisket. So let's get some tallow on it, just to prevent it from oxidizing. And let's get a slice of the flat here. I really like this slicing knife actually, because you can kind of angle it as you lift up, and a lot of slicing knives are flat. So the edge just goes straight and then it ends, and you can kind of, with this, curve up a little bit as you finish the slice, which is really nice. This slice is nice. That's a nice slice. All right, I'll give you guys a look here. I mean, that passes the bend test, guys. I don't know, you tell me, does that look bendy to you? That looks pretty dang good. Let's see if I can pull it apart easily. Pulls apart like nothing. And most importantly, look at that fat rendering. A lot of people say you can't get good fat rendering on a Kamado. Well, look at that. And I could have trimmed this fat a little bit more aggressively and we wouldn't have as much of that white unrendered fat underneath, but you can see that we do have a lot of nice rendered caramely looking fat up there that's gonna taste absolutely delicious. Let's taste this bad boy. Mmm. Oh God, that's good. Oh. This is a good brisket, guys. This is a real good brisket. Ooh. Woo. A little bit of scotch. Oh yeah. The peatiness, the sea salt notes, the vanilla, it goes perfect with this brisket. I really like this scotch actually. Alrighty, let's do a burnt end slice here. I'll just save that on the side, and I'll do a couple slices in here. 1, 2, 3. We'll go for the magical 4th slice of the point, which is supposed to, oh man, I messed up the 4th slice of the point. Okay, the 5th slice of the point, that's gonna be the moneymaker. Here we go, look at that, guys. Perfectly rendered, looks absolutely delicious. I'm gonna put some tallow on here. Pull it apart. Oh, ooey gooey. Let's see how it tastes. Oh, oh man, that's so good. Oh, oh, damn. That is so good. And I'll show you guys on another slice here. If you look at the point, the fat is perfectly rendered. There's barely any white there. It's all rendered down. I gotta tell you guys, this is giving an offset smoker brisket a run for its money. I would say if you put this head to head with an offset smoker brisket, it would be very difficult to tell them apart. I think the only negative here might be that the very edge of the flat is probably overdone. So let's cut into this. And I'll get a slice right from the very edge. Right here. So I'll give you guys a look. So, you know, this is a bit more than a 1/4 inch, but it's not really flopping over. Let's try to pull it apart. It pulls apart pretty easily, but I think it's gonna be dry. Surprisingly, it's edible. So it's not too bad actually for a not too well marbled brisket. The flat feels like it was a little bit too dry, but it actually tastes pretty good. So now the big answer to the question that I know you have, is the Franklin Kamado brisket method worth trying? I think it definitely is. This brisket that I cooked using Aaron Franklin's Kamado method turned out absolutely phenomenal. It's smoky, the fat rendering is there, it's juicy, and I modified the method obviously a little bit. I did a long hold, I made some other tweaks, but it was still substantially the same as how Aaron Franklin described it in his book, Franklin Smoke, and it turned out phenomenal. I think if you do it right and you're getting maximum airflow, you're adding small splits of wood, you're maintaining your temperature, you're spritzing, you're doing all of the things that Aaron Franklin recommends in his book and some of the tips that I recommend in this video, you're gonna get a brisket that is pretty much indistinguishable from an offset smoker brisket for any person that you take off the street and ask to compare them side by side. Maybe a brisket aficionado might be able to tell the difference. An offset smoker brisket might be a little bit smokier, but the fat rendering on this, the color of the bark, the juiciness, all of it looks very similar, if not identical, to an offset smoker brisket. So if you guys have a Kamado, then definitely buy Franklin Smoke. It's a great book, and try this method. It produces an amazing Texas-style brisket. And if you do, let me know how it goes in the comment section below. I will see you guys in the next video, and until then, happy smoking. Scotch.